Hello, party people, and welcome to the very first episode of Season 6 of Law Candor. And they said it wouldn't last. For those of you that are new to the show, Law Candor is the podcast wholly devoted to pursuing the legal technology revolution. I am Bill Mariano, and I am here with my co-host, as always, Rob Hellewell. Again, welcome to the show. We have a great one today. The topic is, does cellular 5G equal 5 times the fraud and misconduct risk? But before we get to that, with Jerry Bui, who is one of our favorite guests that we've ever had, we're going to kick off the episode by bringing to you our favorite portion of the program,
Sightings of Radical Brilliance.
And as the name implies, of course, this is the part of the show where we bring to you the latest and greatest of noteworthy innovation and acts of sheer genius in the news. Rob, what do we have today?
I mean, come on, since the majority of us are probably sitting at home right now, working remotely, it only makes sense to talk about something related to that. And I saw an article, this was published in itpro.com. It's called Insider Data Breaches Set to Increase Due to Remote Work Shift, authored by Sabina Weston. The gist of it is that now that you have so many more people working from home, they're expecting to see a greater number of breaches that are caused by kind of like internal, whether it's somebody accidentally clicking on something or maliciously breaching, just kind of opening up the fact that when you're working from home, it's even harder, to solve a problem that is growing, every year. And the article raises some good points.
Yeah, I mean, I think we went from like a 70% in office, 30% at home to a 90-10, 10% being in office. Most companies, I think, have probably done that at least, and so I think that the two things to be worried about are, one, breaches, and two, if you're into commercial real estate, because people are going to be closing offices. But seriously, I think this is the thing that keeps the IT teams up at night, right? That people are logging in from home. They're not necessarily logging into the VPN. They're clicking on phishing emails. They're clicking on this malware. They're doing different things because they're not protected by being on the network and plugged into the office. And especially for us, we get this stuff. Our company gets this stuff because this is the business we're in. What if you're just a small business out there? What if you're a small law firm out there, and all of a sudden people are working from home, or just a small small to mid-sized business, and you're not typically worried about this stuff? You are now wide open because your employees being at home. That's a consequence of them being at home, is that you're now wide open.
Well, and it's another part of the problem is that nobody planned this. So there wasn't like this rollout to working at home. Suddenly you got everybody working there. And you're right. we kind of live and breathe this stuff. Somebody was telling me that, their company is so aggressive on this that they actually send out phishing emails to employees. And then, they're evaluated on, how they responded to it or whether they clicked. On the other hand of the spectrum, you've got people that have never really had to think about this that much. Everybody was working from an office, and yeah, this is a big problem. And again, just another factor to make it worse.
Yeah. And one thing about this article, they're not great about giving you advice on how to avoid it.
No, because what can you do?
Just be on the. It basically says prioritize product security, build a developer champions program, and explore breach and attack simulation tools. All right, fine, we get that. But if you're not a small business and you're not looking for this, I mean, there's not a whole lot of advice here. I think what I'm assuming is that there's going to be a lot of cybersecurity companies getting a lot more work to protect small businesses, because a lot of small businesses are going to be exposed in ways that they never really predicted.
Yeah, and again, it's just all the unintended consequences of of COVID. Yet another one that we have to worry about. And I think, ironically, the only people that are actually going to an office to work are all these hackers, that are sitting in warehouses in other parts of the world.
Yeah, and I don't want to make fun of hackers because I don't want to be a target. So hackers, go do your thing. Anyway, all right. Well, listen, now we're going to cut to the guest speaker segment of the show. We've had Jerry on before. He is a fantastic guest. He's got the second most popular podcast in the history of ediscovery and technology. I think you're really going to like it. Again, we're going to discuss 5G and how it could lead to more fraud and misconduct risk. And yeah.
Okay, we're excited to welcome, for the second time, Jerry Bui, Executive Director of Digital Forensics at Lighthouse. And Jerry, I don't know if you know how much of an honor this is to be invited on the podcast, not once, but 2 times.
Yeah, it's an honor for sure. Is this going to be like Saturday Night Live where I get a jacket when I come on, like hosting 5 times.
Yeah, we have to do that because T-shirts everybody gets, but jackets are only for multiple offenders.
Clearly, that's the right way to go. And Jerry, like, since you've already introduced yourself to our audience, who I'm sure all remember, we're going to change it up a little bit. And so the question we have for you this morning is, how did you get into ediscovery? What brought you into our crazy world?
Gosh, yeah. I think like a lot of people, I fell into it. It's not really a course of study in schools. I think digital forensics is a growing field for sure. But, this is digital forensics attached to a ediscovery behemoth. But I got kind of into the field by happenstance, lucky or unlucky, depending on your perspective. I was studying political science and English at UCLA. So the intention was to go to law school. So I had always had my eye on kind of the litigation field. But I didn't ultimately go to law school. I instead, once I graduated with my undergrad degree, went to look at Microsoft certifications. So knew that in 1999, that was, the hot field at the time, or the hot certification. I got certified in Microsoft and started doing network administration. So I learned a lot about IT, and then I started programming. And so when you combine kind of my liberal arts background with that technical acumen, it was a perfect storm to get introduced into lit support. And that's where I started first doing, document analysis, metadata analysis, and then, supporting the reviews, getting my project management training, and then, ultimately my certified fraud examiner certification. Did most of my career in the Big Four. So originally starting at KPMG and then going on to Ernst & Young and then PricewaterhouseCoopers. So pretty lengthy career in ediscovery, and kind of just fell into it, getting introduced by someone else who was in the lit support field.
Jerry, the title of this episode is Does Cellular 5G equal 5x the fraud and misconduct as it relates to risk? So just give us a quick overview. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of fake news, to use the parlance of our times, out there around 5G, but there's got to be something. Well, give us a quick overview of the challenge here. How does 5G lead to fraud and misconduct potentially?
Yeah, I always pay extra attention to these kind of transformative technical innovations. And, every time you take a step up in mobile connectivity, here going from 4G LTE to 5G, it's significant in my mind because it's going to be 10 to 100 times faster, right? And 4G is pretty fast in and of itself, but there are still kind of those, based on the bandwidth, those dead zones where when your signal is weak, you can't realistically do any work. So you're not necessarily going to get the optimum speed all the time, but I think with 5G and its given bandwidth, when you are experiencing a weak signal, it'll still be realistic to perform the activities that you need to perform on your mobile device. So given that kind of reliability going forward, I think a lot more work is going to be conducted from your phone. So I look at this as kind of like, how are habits going to change, right? And I think it's going to be an acceleration of a trend that's already proving that a lot of enterprise data, a lot of forensic evidence is going to be stored on mobile and the cloud. I think it's just 5G is going to facilitate that as the information highway for those types of business communication and document consumption.
Yeah, and Jerry, one of the things we talk about on the podcast a lot is, what are the consequences of these changes of technology, especially how it relates to ediscovery? What do you think this is going to drive in our industry?
Yeah, we all make that decision especially when we're on the road and on cellular. What can I do from my phone, and what can I do from my laptop, right? And it's going to be based on, okay, I'm in the car or I'm moving in between cell towers and dead zones. And what can I do and what I can't do, and when do I switch between my devices? And I think you're just going to have the ability to stick on your mobile device, right? I think a lot of folks could be carrying, tablets, and they're cellular enabled tablets nowadays. And rather than get frustrated and just say, I'm going to wait till I get to the hotel room or wait till I get to the office, there'll be a always on seamless kind of work capability. And so I think for ediscovery purposes, a lot of those documents that we focus in on, a lot of those, the messaging in the documents, the ESI that we focus on will be stored more consistently on these mobile devices or in the cloud. And if you're doing e-discovery today, we know that those are the most difficult devices and data sources to collect and transform and basically prep for document review. So there's just going to be much more of that and less traditional stuff on the desktop PC or the laptop PC and less on traditional email servers. If you're working on mobile devices, you're subject to the restrictions of those mobile operating systems. And we could talk about that in a little bit.
And so what about insider threats like shadow IT, encrypted messages, things like that? How do those come into play here?
Yeah. Perfect segue. You're reading my mind, Bill. The shadow IT is facilitated through mobile devices, right? And so it's the wealth of apps that you have available to you on iOS and on Android. And, the cloud software as a service type applications are mobile first, or browser based, but really mobile app centric. So you look at Slack, for example, or Telegram or Signal, if you're talking about the communications, that's kind of promoted a movement away from traditional email, right? It's that kind of collaboration, instant chat type of communication that we're having a much harder time trying to collect and represent with a high level of fidelity compared to the original platforms. People want to see the bubble chats. They want to see the emoticons. They want to see the attachments or hyperlinks as they're represented within the actual collaboration platform. And so there's a lot of work that we have to put in, a lot of extra post-processing work that we have to put in order to maintain that fidelity or that authenticity for forensic purposes, but also for e-discovery purposes.
And Jerry, like when you have this shift to, using our mobile devices more, what kind of a threat does that propose, I guess, from, threats coming from the outside?
Yeah, if you want to think about the external threats, more so the information security risk due to data breaches and hackers and things of that sort, the more that you're on the road using these devices, the more opportunities there are to try to basically get control of your device, find a way in. And the more movement there is due to this mobility, just like going from airports to cafes and things of that nature, that's just only going to increase because there's going to be much more confidence around your connectivity. So you're going to do a lot more banking. You're going to do a lot more work. You're going to be transmitting a lot more sensitive data over the wire as opposed to within the confines of a VPN controlled enterprise corporate issued environment. I think we need to set our minds away from the safe zones that we created in the past towards this arena. You're going to have a lot of users navigating these zones physically and virtually where hackers have potentially more access. You're not going to be under the protection of IT when you're talking about bring your own device type mobile form factors, right? So think about the mobility, think about the devices and how they're owned, and think about how they're not within the four virtual walls or the firewall that the corporate IT infrastructure offers.
So that's really interesting. So let's talk about explain this to me like I'm a 5-year-old, because in many ways, like my wife will tell you I am. How does this affect compliance programs at an organization, like departing employees, for instance?
Yeah, sure. So, the bulk of what we deal with are reactive type scenarios. When you're talking about compliance, I think their focus is largely on proactive. And the departing employee program, for example, is often proactive. You want to kind of, as employees are leaving the company, collect their devices, but also understand, what level these employees operated at, what kind of data did they have access to, are they under legal hold? Those are all compliance type concerns. And so you want to get a forensic snapshot of these devices. And there's a very short window of opportunity before you can get all of that information and get a valid snapshot of these devices before they're ultimately repurposed, right? And I think there's very little time spent planning that out, especially now it's only exacerbated with work from home models and also with BYOD. Again, if we're talking about a shift towards devices that the employees ultimately own, there's going to be less cooperation around, yes, I'm going to surrender my phone or my mobile device so that you can have a forensic snapshot of it in case any litigation occurs, right? We've already seen that in today's environment. So the more and more intermingling you have of enterprise data, corporate-owned data mixed with personal data on a BYOD device, the more resistance that you'll see. So I just think that that trend is going to grow. The more relevant information by way of messaging and documents stored on these BYOD devices are going to grow. And, they're, even if they do surrender them or, because the company owns them or they themselves are asserting a data privacy issue, you've got to get the time in order to image it. And then you're going to have to address a lot of questions around, well, can't you just get the work information and not touch my personal information? And as we all know, the process is to do a full forensic image of that device. And that's kind of the best practice. And so, we say we take a fully encrypted, tamper-proof image of the device and then only extract the relevant material. But even with that kind of talk track around what we'll touch and what we won't touch, there's still plenty of resistance. And then also a lack of cooperation when it comes to PIN codes and iCloud account passwords or backup encryption passwords. These are all challenges that we're confronted with today, and they'll only increase once there's much more relevant data, and there's going to be a greater frequency that it's just going to be the norm that we're going to want to collect images from these devices, these mobile devices.
And Jerry, we've talked about a lot of potential challenges for people. What advice are you giving to clients who are trying to come up with solutions for some of these, or at least preparing for them as 5G rolls out?
Yeah, I think the awareness around habitual use of these devices, just the fact that there's going to be a lot more relevant data on there. You've got to construct the policies and procedures so that users are aware of segregating that data. For example, I usually recommend, if you're doing email or you're handling documents, create separate accounts, create separate folders, and so that you're very well organized. Today, it's the best practice to take a full forensic image, but there's also the argument to be made, especially as these forensic tools adapt, to doing more targeted collections. And if you can, as a user or an employee, you can point the forensic examiner to where you confidently store all of your documents, work-related documents, and this is where it's located, or in this email folder. I think those are ways that can make the process less painful. So, having some trainings around that type of data hygiene practices is one way. Another way is to deploy better monitoring tools around this shift towards mobile and cloud. So there's something called Cloud Access Security Brokers, these CASB tools. It's a brand new category of monitoring tools that can be deployed. And so that's becoming popular with an agent that's installed on the mobile device, and then having a cloud-based security broker to check all of the activity, not necessarily to block it. Because again, you want to promote collaboration and productivity. These are like Slack and other types of apps are things that users and even clients and customers are asking for. And so if you allow that, but you put some guardrails around how it can be used, right? And also, creating through your CASB monitoring tool alerts as it relates to, documents being attached, when they shouldn't be, or the types of documents that are attached when they shouldn't be. Have alerts around keywords that are used in messaging environments. So these are new ways, given the new ways of working. And when you use 5G, it's only going to promote, increase, and accelerate the movement towards mobile and cloud. And so recognizing that these solutions are available for deployment, I think just got to include it as part of your onboarding and software evaluation budgeting.
So, and you just covered some interesting best practices there. I guess my question would be, with regard to those best practices, if clients want to know more, go deeper, set up a full program around this to make sure that they're taking this all into account, should they be reaching out internally, externally? What would your advice be there?
I think it's a three-way partnership, Bill. These are complex types of problems. It's not one that can be solved by the enterprise alone. You've got to think about the frenetic activity around applications, software as a service. Silicon Valley cannot be underestimated with their creativity. And look at how quickly people shift from one messaging app to another, whether it's Messenger to WhatsApp to Telegram. Like, what's the, shiny new toy of the day? That's how quickly people are converting their daily habits in terms of collaboration. So it's a partnership with IT for sure, and understanding what's the current state with their shadow IT risk. In other words, what are the non-approved applications that departments, geographies, product lines are using to enhance their communication and collaboration. Because I think there's going to be pockets of different types of applications that people spin up on their phones and tablets and in the cloud that are operating outside the purview of IT. So I think it's compliance operating with IT, but also IT and both departments operating with a consulting firm like ours who have a broad base of clients where we experience the latest and greatest challenges, right? So we could bring all of that experience to bear and advise on, hey, this other peer company is solving the problem this way, or this other company in a totally different industry has creatively used this solution, so it might apply to you here. So I think that's where we can advise pretty effectively, especially when you're talking about bleeding edge technologies and the bleeding edge risk surrounding those technologies.
Jerry, this has been an amazing session. We've covered a lot of ground. Maybe just to sum up, it's clear that 5G is going to drive more use of mobile devices for work. We talked about some of the limitations around how to collect that information. We explored, both the internal and the external risks around, having more work happen on mobile devices. And I think it was real interesting to talk about some of the compliance challenges and the retention challenges that exist around this. And I really thought that your advice was great. Come up with the right policies and procedures now, get those in place before this happens and not try to be as less reactive as possible. For people that, want to protect their data, you're going to have to be more organized. And I thought that's the suggestion around having, folders that are more clearly defined so that if you're in a situation where something has to get collected, it can easily be extracted and only touch, the work information and not your private information. And finally, being able to adopt some of these emerging technologies that can be used to help govern these things, as well as partnering with your IT group. All great advice. And I know that you live and breathe this every day. Really appreciate you joining the podcast and spending time with us.
It was my pleasure, and congrats on a season 6. That's amazing.
I know everyone was skeptical, Jerry, but it happened.
Dude, Dan, thank you for explaining that to me like I'm a 5-year-old without being completely condescending. See, that's where the disconnect is with me and my wife. I do it, she's completely condescending. But seriously, thanks for doing it. I appreciate it. We appreciate it. We always learn something whenever we talk to you, especially when you're a guest on the show. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Jeff.
Hey, folks. Like Bill mentioned before, hard to believe that we're in season 6. There were a lot of skeptics out there that said it would never happen, but we need your support. Please show some love by rating Law Candor. Go to Apple Podcasts, go to Stitcher, everywhere where you can sign up and leave a review. These lucrative salaries that we get are not going to pay themselves. We need your support. Thank you.
Sounds like you're advertising us for PBS.